The night air in Hartwell Hollow was thick with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke, the kind of darkness that pressed in close and made every footstep feel like trespass. On the edge of the village, where the trees grew wild and the river ran black, the old mill stood sentinel, its silhouette hunched and brooding against the moonlit sky. Tonight, as every night, the grinding will turned, its low, guttural groan echoing through the valley, a sound that seemed to gnaw at the bones of anyone who heard it. Jonas Wilcox, lantern in hand, walked the narrow path home, his boots sinking into the mud with each reluctant step. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, but the mill's windows glimmered with a sickly yellow light, drawing his gaze like a moth to flame. The stories whispered in the tavern of missing children, of strange stains on the riverbank, of the Hartwell brothers' secretive ways, clung to him like a second skin. He told himself he didn't believe them. He told himself the mill was just a mill, and the Hartwells were just men. But as the grinding will shrieked and stuttered, as if chewing on something it could not swallow, Jonas quickened his pace, heart hammering, breath fogging in the cold. He would not look back. Not tonight. Not with the wheel still turning. What really happened at the Hartwell mill? What secrets did those grinding stones keep? And what price did the village pay for its prosperity? Before this story is done, you'll find yourself questioning every shadow, every rumor, every truth you thought you knew. And as you listen, ask yourself, what do you think the mill was really grinding? Share your guesses below if you dare. The truth is darker than you imagine. In the spring of 1854, Connecticut was a patchwork of rolling hills and dense forests, stitched together by winding dirt roads and the slow, meandering rivers that fed the land. Hartwell Hollow was a village carved from the wilderness, its cluster of clapboard houses and weathered barns huddled close for warmth against the long, bitter winters. The people here were sturdy, practical folk, farmers, blacksmiths, seamstresses, and millers, bound together by necessity and the unspoken understanding that the world beyond the tree line was vast, wild, and indifferent. At the heart of the village stood the Hartwell Mill, its stone foundation sunk deep into the earth, its wooden frame rising 3 stories above the riverbank. The mill was more than a building. It was the village's pulse, the place where grain became bread, where fortunes were made and lost with the turn of the wheel. Its great water wheel, slick with moss and river silt, turned day and night, powered by the relentless current. The grinding stones inside were said to be the finest in the county, imported at great expense from distant quarries, and the flour they produced was prized from Hartford to New Haven. The Hartwell family had built the mill with their own hands, or so the story went. Elias and Silas Hartwell, brothers born a year apart, had inherited their father's ambition and his iron will. They were respected, even admired, for their industry and their generosity. Elias with his easy smile and ready laugh, Silas with his quiet, watchful eyes. The brothers employed half the village, paid fair wages, and donated flour to the church every Sunday. Their mother, Abigail, was a fixture at every gathering, her presence a balm to the lonely and the grieving. To outsiders, the Hartwells seemed the very model of New England virtue, hardworking, pious, and prosperous. Yet beneath the surface, the village was not as peaceful as it appeared. The woods pressed close, their shadows deep and tangled, and the river sometimes ran red with clay after a hard rain. Children were warned not to stray too far from home, not because of wolves or bears, but because the land itself was old and capricious, haunted by memories older than the village. The mill, for all its bounty, was a place of uneasy reverence. Its will never stopped, not even on the Sabbath, and the grinding stones sometimes shrieked in the night, a sound that set dogs to howling and babies to tears. Strange things had always happened in Hartwell Hollow, but lately, the oddities had grown harder to ignore. Livestock vanished from locked barns, their tracks ending abruptly at the river's edge. The church bell tolled at odd hours, its rope found swinging in the empty nave. More than one villager claimed to have seen figures moving behind the mill's windows long after the brothers had gone home, shadows that flickered and danced in the lamplight. The air itself seemed charged, heavy with the promise of a coming storm. Whispers traveled quickly in a place so small. Some said the land was cursed, that the Hartwells had built their mill on ground best left undisturbed. Others blamed the brothers themselves, muttering about old debts and family feuds, about secrets buried deeper than the mill's foundation. But most kept their suspicions to themselves. clinging to routine and ritual, trusting that hard work and prayer would keep the darkness at bay. Still, as the days grew longer and the nights more restless, a sense of unease settled over Hartwell Hollow. The mills will turned on, indifferent to the fears of those who depended on it. And in the hush before dawn, when the mist curled low over the river and the world seemed to hold its breath, even the bravest souls wondered what price they might one day pay for the Hartwell's prosperity. Elias and Silas Hartwell were born to the same mother, raised under the same roof, and yet, from the very beginning, they seemed to have been shaped by different winds. Elias, the elder by a single year, entered the world with a wail that echoed through the house like a trumpet's call. He was a child of sunlight and laughter, quick to smile, quick to forgive, and possessed of a restless energy that made him the darling of the village. He learned to walk early, to talk even earlier, and by the time he was 10, he could charm a coin from a miser's pocket or a story from the lips of the oldest crone. His hair was the color of ripe wheat, his eyes a clear, untroubled blue, and his hands, though calloused from work, were always gentle. Silas, by contrast, was a child of shadows. He was born in the dead of winter, when the river froze solid and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. He rarely cried, and when he did, it was a thin, reedy sound, easily lost in the night. Silas grew slowly, quietly, always a step behind his brother, always watching. His hair was dark as river mud, his eyes a deep, unreadable gray. Where Elias was quick to speak, Silas was slow, weighing every word as if it might be his last. He moved with a careful deliberation, a stillness that unsettled those who did not know him well. Despite their differences, the brothers were inseparable. They worked side by side in the mill from the time they could lift a sack of grain, learning the trade from their father, who ruled the place with a stern but loving hand. Elias took to the work with enthusiasm, delighting in the rhythm of the wheel and the music of the grinding stones. Silas, for his part, was fascinated by the machinery itself, the gears and belts, the hidden workings that made the whole thing run. He spent hours tinkering in the shadows, coaxing more power from the river, more flour from the grain. Their bond was forged in sweat and sawdust, in shared secrets and whispered dreams. Yet, as they grew into men, a subtle rivalry began to take root. Elias was the face of the family, the one who greeted customers with a clap on the back and a joke on his lips. He was elected to the church council, invited to every wedding and christening, trusted with the village's most delicate disputes. Silas, meanwhile, remained in the background, his contributions overlooked, his ideas dismissed as too strange, too ambitious. He watched as Elias basked in the village's affection, and though he never spoke of it, a quiet resentment began to simmer beneath his calm exterior. Their father's death, sudden and unexpected, only deepened the divide. The mill passed to both brothers, but it was Elias who took charge, Elias who made the decisions, Elias who reaped the praise. Silas retreated further into himself, spending long nights alone in the mill, his lantern burning long after the others had gone to bed. Some said he was haunted by grief. Others whispered that he was simply biding his time. Yet, for all their differences, there was love between them, a fierce, complicated love, born of shared hardship and mutual dependence. Elias often sought out Silas's counsel, and Silas, for all his bitterness, never failed to come when his brother called. They fought, as brothers do, but their quarrels were always private, their reconciliations swift and sincere. To the outside world, they were a united front, the twin pillars upon which the village's prosperity rested. But beneath the surface, old wounds festered. Silas's innovations, his experiments with the mill's machinery, his strange fascination with the river's currents, were a source of constant tension. Elias worried that his brother's ambitions would bring ruin, that his tinkering would upset the delicate balance that kept the mill running. Silas, in turn, chafed under Elias's easy authority, resenting the way his own contributions were overshadowed. It was this mixture of love and rivalry, trust and suspicion, that would shape the tragedy to come. For in the end, it was not the river, nor the grinding stones, nor even the darkness in the woods that would doom the Hartwell brothers, but the secrets they kept from each other and from themselves. As you listen to their story, ask yourself, which brother do you trust? The golden sun, beloved by all, or the quiet shadow, always watching, always waiting? Share your thoughts below. The answer may not be as simple as it seems. It began, as these things so often do, with a single, inexplicable absence. Her name was Mary Ellen Finch, a girl of 12 with a wild mane of red hair and a laugh that could be heard from the farthest field. She was the youngest of 5, the only daughter, and the pride of her father's eye. On the evening she vanished, the air was thick with the promise of rain, the sky bruised purple at the edges, and the river swollen from a week of storms. Mary Ellen had been sent to fetch her brothers from the mill, where they sometimes lingered after dusk to watch the grinding stones and listen to Elias's stories. She set off with a basket of bread and a lantern, her boots splashing through puddles, her voice raised in song. She was seen by Mrs. Larkin, who waved from her porch, and by Old Man Tully, who nodded as she passed his gate. She was seen, and then she was not. When the boys returned home alone, their mother's first thought was that Mary Ellen had stopped to visit a friend, or perhaps lost track of time chasing fireflies along the riverbank. The village was small, the woods familiar, and children often wandered farther than they meant to. But as the hours slipped by and the rain began to fall in earnest, worry crept in like a chill. Lanterns were lit, voices called out into the night, and the search began. At first, the community clung to reason. Perhaps she had twisted an ankle and was waiting for help. Perhaps she had taken shelter from the storm beneath the old willow by the mill pond. The men fanned out in pairs, their boots squelching in the mud, their lanterns bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps. They called her name until their voices were hoarse, but the only answer was the grinding of the mill, steady and indifferent, echoing through the rain-soaked night. By morning, hope had begun to fray. The river was dragged, the woods combed, every barn and cellar searched. The basket was found, half submerged at the water's edge, its contents scattered and sodden. The lantern, too, was recovered, its glass cracked, its flame long since extinguished. But of Mary Ellen, there was no sign. Not a footprint, not a scrap of fabric, not a single red hair. The village gathered in the church, faces drawn and pale, voices hushed. Elias Hartwell stood at the pulpit, offering words of comfort, promising that the mill would close for as long as it took to find the girl. Silas lingered at the back, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clenched tight. The search continued for days, then weeks, but the trail grew colder with each passing hour. The river, swollen and merciless, gave up no secrets. At first, the villagers tried to return to normalcy. The fields needed tending, the animals feeding, the mills could not remain still forever. But something had shifted, a subtle wrongness that lingered in the air. Children were kept close to home, doors were bolted at dusk, and the laughter that once echoed through the village faded to uneasy silence. Then other oddities began to surface. A calf, barely a week old, vanished from the Larkin barn, its stall door found swinging open in the morning breeze. The church bell rang out at midnight, though no one claimed to have pulled the rope. A patch of earth near the mill pond was found churned and muddy, as if something had been dragged across it, but the rain had washed away any trace of what, or who, it might have been. Whispers grew louder. Some blamed the river, swollen and hungry after so much rain. Others muttered about wolves, though none had been seen in years. A few, bolder or more fearful, began to speak of curses, of old wrongs and restless spirits. The mill, once a symbol of prosperity, now loomed over the village like a specter, its wheel turning ceaselessly, grinding away the last shreds of certainty. Elias did his best to reassure the villagers, organizing search parties, offering rewards, praying with the grieving. Silas, meanwhile, grew more withdrawn, spending long hours alone in the mill, emerging only at dusk, his face pale and drawn. Some said he was haunted by guilt, others that he knew more than he let on. The brothers' once unbreakable bond began to show cracks, their words to each other sharp and brittle. As the days slipped into weeks, hope curdled into fear. The village was no longer a place of safety, but a place of waiting, waiting for answers, for closure, for the next shadow to fall. And all the while, the mill's grinding wheel turned, its voice rising and falling in the night, a constant reminder that something in Hartwell Hollow had changed forever. What had taken Mary Ellen Finch? Was it the river, the woods, or something far closer to home? The villagers could only wonder. their questions hanging in the air like the mist that curled over the water at dawn. And as you listen, ask yourself, what would you have believed, standing in their shoes, with the mill's song echoing in your ears and the darkness pressing in on every side? The first omen had come, and with it the unraveling had begun. In the weeks that followed Mary Ellen's disappearance, Hartwell Hollow became a crucible for fear. The village, once bound by the sturdy logic of hard work and neighborly trust, began to fracture along invisible lines. The search parties dwindled, replaced by whispered conversations behind closed doors and sidelong glances in the market square. The mill's wheel, ever turning, became a metronome for mounting anxiety. It's grown a constant reminder that something in the order of things had been broken. It started with the old stories, the ones told in hushed voices by the hearth when the wind howled and the shadows grew long. The land, some said, had never truly belonged to the living. Before the Hartwells built their mill, before the first stone of the church was laid, the woods and river had been the domain of things best left unnamed. There were tales of the night folk, spirits that wandered the banks after dark, luring the unwary into the water. Others spoke of the Red Lady, a ghost said to appear when the river ran high, her hair streaming behind her like blood in the current. These stories, once dismissed as the harmless fancies of old women and children, now took on a sharper edge. The rational minds of the village, men like Elias Hartwell and Reverend Pritchard, sought to quell the rising tide of superstition. They spoke of wolves, of river currents, of the dangers of wandering alone after dark. They organized patrols, reinforced doors, and urged calm. But reason in the face of the unknown is a fragile thing. Each new oddity, a missing animal, a strange mark on a door, a child's nightmare, became another thread in a tapestry of dread. It was Silas who first noticed the patterns. He kept a ledger, marking each incident with meticulous care. The dates, the locations, the phases of the moon. He saw connections where others saw only chaos. The disappearances, the strange noises, the sudden illnesses. They clustered around the mill, radiating outward like ripples in a pond. Silas grew obsessed, his notes filling page after page, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a weight that unsettled even the most skeptical. As fear tightened its grip, rituals began to emerge. Small acts of desperation, half remembered from older times. Mothers hung sprigs of rowan and garlic above their doors. Fathers carved strange symbols into the lintels, muttering prayers in the language of their grandparents. Children were forbidden to whistle after dark, lest they attract the attention of wandering spirits. The church, once a place of comfort, became a fortress, its doors barred at night, its candles burning long past midnight. But it was at the mill itself that the strangest rituals took root. Workers began to leave offerings at the threshold. A crust of bread, a silver coin, a lock of hair. Some claimed to have seen Silas, late at night, scattering salt in a circle around the grinding stones, his lips moving in silent supplication. Others whispered that Elias had been seen kneeling by the river, his hands plunged into the icy water, as if searching for something lost. The line between superstition and necessity blurred, each ritual a small insurance against the unknown. The village divided itself into camps. There were those who clung to reason, insisting that every mystery had a logical explanation. They scoffed at the rituals, mocked the old stories, and accused the Hartwells of feeding the hysteria for their own ends. Then there were those who believed, who saw omens in every shadow and heard warnings in the wind. They spoke of curses, of debts unpaid, of the land's hunger for sacrifice. The two sides eyed each other with suspicion, each convinced that the other was courting disaster. The tension came to a head one night when the mill's wheel ground to a sudden, shuddering halt. The river, swollen with rain, had dislodged a great branch, jamming the mechanism. The workers gathered in the darkness, their faces pale, their voices trembling. Some saw it as a sign, a warning from whatever haunted the land. Others cursed the river and set to work with axes and ropes, determined to restore order. But as the wheel began to turn again, slower now, heavier, a sense of unease lingered. It was as if the mill itself had become a living thing, its hunger sated only for a moment. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the Hartwells had angered the spirits by building on sacred ground. Others claimed that Mary Ellen's ghost had been seen wandering the riverbank, her lantern flickering in the mist. A few, braver or more desperate, began to question the brothers themselves. What secrets did they keep? What bargains had they struck to ensure the mill's prosperity? The line between victim and suspect blurred, suspicion feeding on itself in the dark. As you listen to these stories, ask yourself, do you believe in curses? Or is all of this just coincidence? Is fear a force of its own, shaping reality to fit the stories we tell? Or is there something older, something deeper at work in places like Hartwell Hollow? Something that waits for the right moment to rise? Share your thoughts below. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between what we see and what we fear. The summer of 1854 arrived heavy and airless, the heat pressing down on Hartwell Hollow like a hand over a mouth. The river, once a source of life and laughter, now seemed to crawl sluggishly past the mill, its surface broken only by the slow, relentless turning of the wheel. The mill's song, once a comfort, had become a dirge, an endless, grinding lament that echoed through the village day and night, as if the stones themselves were mourning. It was during this oppressive season that the disappearances multiplied. First, it was Samuel Larkin, a farmhand known for his strength and his fondness for cider, who vanished on his way home from the tavern. His hat was found snagged on a bramble near the mill race, but of Samuel, there was no trace. Then, a pair of sisters, Ruth and Abigail Tully, failed to return from gathering wildflowers in the meadow. Their mother found their baskets, still brimming with daisies, abandoned at the edge of the woods. The village, already raw from Mary Ellen's loss, now trembled on the edge of panic. The Hartwell brothers, once the village's pride, became its lightning rods. Elias threw himself into the search, organizing patrols, offering rewards, and praying with the bereaved. He moved through the village with a desperate energy, his face drawn, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. He spoke of hope, of faith, of the need to stand together in the face of darkness. But his words, once so persuasive, now rang hollow. The villagers listened, but their eyes slid away, their trust eroding with every new loss. Silas, meanwhile, withdrew further into the mill's shadow. He was seen less and less, emerging only at dusk to check the machinery or to walk the riverbank, his head bowed, his hands buried deep in his pockets. Rumors swirled around him like gnats. Some said he was searching for clues, others that he was communing with whatever haunted the land. A few whispered that he was to blame, that his strange rituals and late-night wanderings had brought a curse upon them all. The brothers' relationship, once a source of strength, began to fracture under the strain. Their arguments, once private, now spilled into the open. Elias accused Silas of fueling the villagers' fears with his talk of patterns and omens. Silas, in turn, accused Elias of willful blindness, of refusing to see the truth staring them in the face. Their mother, Abigail, tried to mediate, but her health was failing, her once steady hands now trembling with age and worry. The village itself split along lines of faith and suspicion. Some clung to the Hartwells, insisting that the brothers were victims of the same darkness that stalked them all. They pointed to the mill's generosity, to the flour that fed their families, to the years of prosperity that had preceded the troubles. Others, hardened by loss and fear, turned against the brothers. They spoke of old grudges, of debts unpaid, of secrets buried beneath the mill's foundation. They gathered in small, tight-knit groups, their conversations laced with accusation and dread. Innocence and corruption danced a slow, bitter waltz through the streets of Hartwell Hollow. The children, once free to roam the fields and woods, were now kept indoors, their laughter replaced by anxious whispers. The church, once a place of unity, became a battleground, its pews divided between those who prayed for deliverance and those who demanded justice. The mill, the village's heart, now felt more like its gallows, and through it all the grinding never stopped. Day and night, the wheel turned, the stones ground, the air filled with the scent of flour and something else, something metallic, sharp, and faintly sweet. Some said it was just the river swollen with summer rain. Others claimed it was the smell of fear itself, rising from the earth like a warning. Elias tried to hold the village together, but each new disappearance chipped away at his authority. He began to look haunted, his once bright eyes clouded with doubt. Silas, for his part, seemed to grow more certain, his obsession with the mill's patterns deepening. He spoke less, but when he did, his words were edged with a kind of grim conviction. "The land remembers," he told his brother one night, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It always remembers." The villagers watched the brothers, their every move scrutinized, their every word dissected. Some pitied them, others feared them, a few even hated them. But all agreed on one thing: the Hartwell mill was no longer just a place of work. It had become a crucible, a place where innocence was ground away, leaving only the raw, bitter residue of suspicion and grief. As the summer waned and the shadows grew longer, the village waited for answers, for justice, for the grinding to finally cease. But the wheel turned on, indifferent to their suffering, its song a constant reminder that in Hartwell Hollow, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. And as you listen, ask yourself, when does faith become blindness, and when does suspicion become a kind of corruption all its own? In a world where innocence can vanish in a heartbeat, who do you trust to tell you the truth? The arrival of Constable Nathaniel Graves in Hartwell Hollow was met with a mixture of relief and resentment. He came from New Haven, summoned by a desperate letter from Reverend Pritchard and a petition signed by half the village. Graves was a tall, spare man with a hawk's nose and a reputation for solving the unsolvable. He wore his badge like a shield and carried a notebook in which he recorded every detail, no matter how small or strange. He listened more than he spoke, his eyes missing nothing, his presence a silent rebuke to the village's growing hysteria. From the moment he stepped off the coach, Graves sensed the tension that gripped Hartwell Hollow. The villagers watched him from behind curtains and half-closed doors, their faces pinched with suspicion and hope. He made his way first to the mill, where Elias Hartwell greeted him with a handshake that was firm but cold. Silas lingered in the shadows, his gaze wary, his answers clipped. Graves took in the mill's hulking frame, the ceaseless turning of the wheel, the scent of flour and damp stone. He asked questions about the disappearances, about the mill's history, about the brothers' routines. Elias answered readily, eager to clear his family's name. Silas said little, his eyes flickering to the grinding stones as if they might betray him. Graves began his investigation with methodical precision. He walked the riverbank, noting the places where the missing had last been seen. He examined the mill's machinery, tracing the path of the water wheel, the belts, the gears. He spoke to the villagers, coaxing stories from reluctant lips, stories of strange lights at the mill, of screams in the night, of the Hartwells' late-night wanderings. He listened to the old legends, the tales of curses and restless spirits, but he weighed them against the facts, searching for patterns in the chaos. It was in the mill cellar that Graves found the first real clue. The room was cold and damp, the walls lined with sacks of grain and barrels of flour. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. But Graves' sharp eyes caught a faint scuff mark on the floor, a patch of dust disturbed near the far wall. He knelt, running his fingers along the baseboard, and felt the telltale give of a hidden latch. With a quiet click, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Lantern in hand, Graves followed the passage, his footsteps echoing off stone. The air grew colder, the silence broken only by the distant grinding of the mill above. At the end of the passage, he found a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves. On those shelves were jars filled with river water, bundles of dried herbs, and scraps of parchment covered in spidery handwriting. In the center of the room stood a crude altar, stained with something dark and sticky. Graves' heart pounded as he examined the altar, noting the symbols carved into its surface. Symbols that matched those he'd seen scratched into the lintels of village homes. He took the parchments, tucking them into his coat, and returned to the mill proper. That night, in his rented room at the inn, he pored over the writings by candlelight. They were a jumble of notes, sketches, and journal entries, some in Silas's hand, others in a script he did not recognize. The entries spoke of the river's moods, of dreams filled with whispering voices, of experiments with the mill's machinery. One passage caught his eye, The wheel must never stop. It is the only thing that keeps the darkness at bay. Father knew. He paid the price. Now it is our turn. Graves' mind raced. Was this the rambling of a madman, or a record of something more sinister? He questioned Silas the next day, pressing him about the hidden room. Silas's face went pale, his hands trembling. He admitted to keeping the journal, to studying the river and the mill, but insisted it was all in the name of progress. "The land is old," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It remembers things we have forgotten. The mill, it's more than wood and stone. It's a bargain, constable. One we never truly understood." Elias, when confronted, grew angry. He accused Graves of feeding the village's fears, of turning suspicion on the very people who had done the most to help. "We are not monsters," he insisted. "We have lost as much as anyone. My father built this mill to feed the village, not to curse it. Whatever Silas has done, it was out of fear, not malice." But Graves was not satisfied. He dug deeper, interviewing the oldest villagers, piecing together the Hartwell family's history. He learned of the brother's father, a man both revered and feared, who had come to Hartwell Hollow with secrets of his own. There were rumors of a feud with the land's previous owners, of a night when the river ran red and the mills will turned faster than ever before. Some whispered that the elder Hartwell had made a pact, trading something precious for the mill's success. The investigation took a darker turn when Graves discovered a second hidden room, this one beneath the mill's foundation. The entrance was concealed by a loose flagstone, the passage narrow and choked with dust. Inside, he found a collection of old tools, rusted and stained, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The letters, written in a woman's hand, spoke of fear and longing, of a presence in the mill that watched and waited. "The wheel is hungry," one letter read. "It grinds more than grain. It grinds away the years, the memories, the very soul of this place." Graves confronted the brothers with his findings, demanding the truth. Elias broke down, confessing that their father had warned them never to let the mills will stop, that he had spoken of a debt owed to the land. Silas, his voice hollow, admitted to performing rituals in a desperate attempt to protect the village. "We thought we could control it," he said. "We thought we could keep everyone safe. But the price is never what you expect." The village, learning of Graves' discoveries, erupted in chaos. Some demanded the mill be destroyed. Others insisted it was all superstition. The brothers were shunned, their once proud name now a curse. Graves, for his part, was left with more questions than answers. Was the mill truly cursed? Or was it simply the site of too much grief and fear? Had the Hartwells made a bargain with something beyond their understanding? Or had they been undone by their own secrets and guilt? As the investigation reached its fever pitch, Graves stood alone by the river, watching the mills will turn in the moonlight. He wondered what would happen if the grinding ever stopped, if the village would be freed, or if something far worse would be unleashed. The truth, he realized, was as murky as the river itself, its depths hiding things best left undisturbed. And so, the question remains, what did Constable Graves really uncover in Hartwell Hollow? Was it madness, murder, or something older and darker than anyone dared imagine? If you were in his place, would you have dared to dig deeper, or would you have let the wheel keep turning, and the secrets stay buried? Share your thoughts below. The story is not yet done, and the mill's song is far from over. The night the truth came to light, a storm raged over Hartwell Hollow, the sky split by jagged forks of lightning, the river swollen and wild. The mills will spun faster than ever, its grinding roar drowning out the thunder, as if the very heart of the land was beating in panic. The villagers huddled in their homes, candles flickering, prayers whispered, while Constable Graves, lantern in hand, made his way to the mill for what he knew would be the final confrontation. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet stone and old flour, but beneath it lingered something fouler, an iron tang, sharp and primal. Elias and Silas waited in the shadows, their faces drawn and hollow, their eyes reflecting the lantern's trembling light. The brothers stood apart, the gulf between them wider than ever, yet bound by a secret that had festered for generations. Graves demanded answers, his voice echoing off the beams. "No more riddles, no more half-truths. What have you done?" What is the price the mill demands? Elias's shoulders sagged, the weight of years pressing him down. He looked to Silas, who nodded, his face ashen. Together, they began to speak. Not in accusation, but in confession, their voices weaving a tale that chilled the very marrow of Graves' bones. Their father, they revealed, had not simply built the mill. He had bargained for it. When the first stones were laid, the land had resisted. Flooding, blight, and sickness plagued the village. Desperate, the elder Hartwell sought out the last of the old ones. A woman who lived alone in the woods, shunned and feared. She spoke of the river's hunger, of the spirits that dwelled beneath the earth, and of the price that must be paid for prosperity. The bargain was struck in secret. The mill's wheel would never stop, and in return, the land would yield its bounty. But if the wheel faltered, if the grinding ceased, the debt would come due. At first, it seemed a small thing. The mill ran day and night, the village flourished, and the Hartwells prospered. But the old woman's warning proved true. The wheel demanded more than grain. Accidents became common. Workers maimed, children lost to the river, livestock vanishing without a trace. Each time the mill threatened to stop, disaster struck. The elder Hartwell grew gaunt and haunted, his eyes hollow, his hands stained with flour and something darker. On his deathbed, he made his sons swear to keep the wheel turning, no matter the cost. Elias and Silas had tried to honor that promise, but the burden grew heavier with each passing year. Silas, ever the skeptic, searched for a rational explanation, but the patterns were undeniable. The disappearances, the strange illnesses, the nightmares that plagued the village. They all coincided with moments when the mill's wheel slowed or threatened to halt. In desperation, Silas turned to the old rituals, hoping to appease whatever force lurked beneath the stones. He left offerings, drew symbols, whispered prayers in the dead of night. But nothing worked. The hunger remained. Elias, racked with guilt, tried to shield the village from the truth. He doubled the mill's output, worked himself to exhaustion, and begged Silas to stop his experiments. But the brothers' efforts only seemed to feed the darkness. The more they gave, the more the mill demanded. The river ran red after every storm. The grinding stones shrieked in the night, and the villagers' fear grew into hatred. As the storm raged outside, the brothers led Graves to the hidden chamber beneath the mill. There, by the flickering light of the lantern, he saw the altar, the jars of river water, the scraps of parchment covered in desperate scrawl. The air was thick with the memory of every loss, every sacrifice, every secret kept in the name of survival. Graves felt the weight of it pressing down on him, a suffocating presence that seemed to seep from the very walls. Silas knelt by the altar, his hands shaking. "We tried to break the cycle," he whispered. "We tried to find another way, but the land, it remembers, punishes. Every time we faltered, someone paid the price." Elias wept, his tears carving clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. "We never meant for any of this. We only wanted to save the village. But the mill, it's a mouth that never stops eating, and we are its keepers." Graves, for all his skepticism, could not deny what he saw and felt. The room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the grinding above a heartbeat that would not be stilled. He thought of the missing children, the vanished animals, the river's strange moods. Was it madness, a legacy of guilt and fear passed down through generations? Or was there truly something ancient and hungry beneath Hartwell Hollow, something that demanded tribute in blood and sorrow? The storm reached its peak, the wind howling, the river threatening to burst its banks. The mill's wheel shuddered, slowed, then ground to a halt with a sound like a scream. In that instant, the air grew cold, the lantern flickered, and a shadow seemed to rise from the altar, coiling through the room like smoke. Graves felt it brush against his skin, icy and electric, and for a moment, he glimpsed faces in the darkness. Mary Ellen, Samuel, the Tully sisters, all staring with hollow eyes, mouths open in silent warning. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence vanished. The lantern steadied, the air warmed, and the brothers collapsed, spent and broken. The mill, silent for the first time in living memory, seemed to sigh, the weight of centuries lifting for a single, fragile moment. Graves helped the brothers to their feet, leading them out into the storm. The village gathered, drawn by the silence, their faces pale and fearful. Elias confessed everything, his voice raw and trembling. Some wept, others raged, but all understood, in their bones, that the price had been paid, and that the debt was older and deeper than any of them had known. As dawn broke over Hartwell Hollow, the river ran clear for the first time in years. The mill stood silent, its will still, its hunger sated, at least for now. The villagers mourned their lost, comforted their living, and wondered what new bargain might be struck in the days to come. And so, the truth of the Hartwell mill remains a shadow on the land. A story of love and desperation, of bargains made and debts paid in blood. Was it madness, evil, or something supernatural? The answer, like the river, is ever-changing, its depths impossible to plumb. But one thing is certain. In Hartwell Hollow, the past is never truly buried, and the wheel, though stilled, may one day turn again. If you were there, would you have believed the brothers? Would you have dared to break the cycle, or would you have kept the wheel turning, no matter the cost? The story lingers, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. In the days that followed the storm, Hartwell Hollow was a village transformed. The silence that settled over the land was not the gentle hush of peace, but the heavy, suffocating quiet of a place that had seen too much. The mill, once the heart of the community, stood abandoned, its will frozen in place, the river flowing past it as if eager to forget. The villagers moved through their routines with a kind of numbness, their eyes haunted, their voices subdued. The old rhythms of life, planting, harvesting, gathering at the church, resumed, but nothing felt the same. The Hartwell brothers became the focus of every whispered conversation. Elias, gaunt and hollow-eyed, remained in the village, refusing to flee from the consequences of his family's legacy. He worked the fields alongside the men and women he had once employed, his hands blistered and raw, his head bowed in silent penance. Some pitied him, seeing a man broken by guilt and grief. Others could not forgive, their losses too fresh, their anger too sharp. Elias bore it all without complaint, his only comfort the knowledge that the truth had finally been spoken. Silas, on the other hand, vanished into the woods one morning before dawn, leaving behind only a brief note. "I go to seek forgiveness, if such a thing can be found." Some believed he had gone mad, driven into the wilderness by the weight of his own conscience. Others whispered that he had gone to join the old woman in the forest, to learn the secrets of the land and perhaps find a way to break the curse for good. His absence became another wound, another unanswered question in a village already full of them. The mill itself became a monument to all that had been lost. Children dared each other to approach its doors, but none lingered long. The grinding stones, once the source of prosperity, now seemed to radiate a cold, malevolent energy. The river, though it ran clear, was avoided at dusk, its banks overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. The villagers spoke of moving the church, of building a new mill farther upstream, but no one had the heart to begin. The land felt changed, as if it too was mourning. The psychological scars ran deep. Mothers clung to their children, fathers kept watch through the night, and the old stories took on new life. Dreams were troubled, filled with the sound of grinding stones and the sight of pale faces in the mist. Some villagers turned to faith, filling the church with prayers and hymns. Others turned inward, their grief hardening into suspicion and silence. The sense of community that had once defined Hartwell Hollow was fractured, each family retreating into its own circle of fear and memory. Yet, in the midst of the sorrow, there were moments of quiet resilience. The villagers gathered to tend the graves of the lost, to share food and stories, to remind each other that life, however fragile, must go on. The children, though wary, began to play again, their laughter tentative but real. The river, indifferent to human suffering, continued its slow journey to the sea, carrying with it the secrets of the past. The legacy of the Hartwell mill became a cautionary tale, a story told to every new generation. Some believed the curse had been broken, that the village was finally free. Others were not so sure, watching the mill's shadow stretch across the fields at sunset, listening for the faintest echo of grinding in the night. The truth, as always, remained elusive, hidden in the spaces between memory and myth. What do you think truly happened in Hartwell Hollow? Was it the madness of grief and guilt, the weight of secrets too long kept, or something older and darker that demanded its due? Would you have forgiven the Hartwell brothers, or turned your back on them as so many did? Share your thoughts and theories below. The story of the mill is not just a tale of the past. It is a mirror, reflecting the fears and hopes that linger in every community, in every heart. And as the seasons turned, and the village slowly healed, one question remained. If the wheel ever turned again, would anyone be brave enough to face what waited beneath? The story of the Hartwell Mill lingers not just as a tale of tragedy, but as a meditation on the forces that shape us: ambition, guilt, and the power of belief. What began as a quest for prosperity became a legacy of fear, each generation inheriting not only the land and the mill, but the burdens and secrets of those who came before. The Hartwell brothers, in their desperate attempts to protect their village, became both victims and perpetrators, caught in a web spun long before their time. Ambition, in its purest form, is the drive to build, to improve, to leave something lasting behind. Yet, as the Hartwells learned, ambition unchecked can become a kind of blindness, a willingness to ignore warning signs and silence doubts